The screen went black for 3 seconds. When it came back on, I saw my daughter-in-law standing over Max with something in her hand. That's when I dialed 911. My fingers were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. The glow from the screen lit up my face in the darkness of my bedroom, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. On that tiny screen, in my own living room just 2 floors below, Colleen was moving toward my golden retriever with deliberate, calculated steps. Max's tail was tucked between his legs, his body pressed against the corner near the fireplace where my late husband Frank used to sit. I couldn't breathe. The phone felt like ice in my palm, and somewhere in the distance, I heard a voice asking, 911, what's your emergency? But my eyes were locked on that screen, watching the woman my son married reach into a plastic shopping bag and pull out a container. Even through the camera's grainy footage, I could read the label. Antifreeze. My daughter-in-law is poisoning my dog, I whispered into the phone. Right now. I'm watching her on camera. The dispatcher's voice sharpened. What's your address? I gave it, my voice barely steady, while watching Colleen unscrew the green container's cap. She poured it into Max's metal food bowl, the liquid mixing with the kibble I had measured out that morning. My throat closed up. That bowl. I had filled it with love, the way I'd done every morning for 8 years. And she was turning it into poison. Officers are on their way, the dispatcher said. Stay on the line with me. But I was already moving, grabbing my car keys from the nightstand, my reading glasses falling to the floor. I was 20 minutes away at my book club meeting, 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. The screen stayed alive in my hand as I ran down the hallway of the community center, past startled faces and concerned voices calling my name. I had installed that camera 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of watching, documenting, gathering proof of what I suspected but couldn't quite believe. 3 weeks of seeing my daughter-in-law's mask slip away when she thought no one was looking. But this was beyond cruelty. This was murder. Before I tell you what led me to install that camera and what I discovered about the woman sleeping in my son's bed, I want to extend an invitation. Please subscribe to this channel and leave a like. This helps me know you support real stories from real people like me. Comment down below what city you're watching from, and if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted. Your support means everything. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 3 years ago, my son David brought Colleen home for Sunday dinner. She arrived carrying homemade apple pie and wearing a smile that seemed painted on. I remember standing at the sink, washing lettuce for the salad, and watching through the window as she stepped out of David's car. Something in the way she checked her reflection in the side mirror before walking to the door made me pause. It was too calculated, too rehearsed. Mom, this is Colleen, David said, his face bright with the kind of happiness I hadn't seen since his father passed. Colleen, my mom, Margaret. She took my wet hands in hers without hesitation, her grip firm and warm. Mrs. Hartley, David has told me so much about you. I've been dying to meet the woman who raised such an incredible man. The words were perfect. Too perfect. Frank used to tell me, Maggie, your gut never lies. Trust it. And my gut was screaming, but I smiled anyway because David's eyes were pleading with me to love her the way he did. Max had other ideas. When Colleen bent down to pet him, he backed away, ears flattened against his head. It was the first time I'd ever seen my therapy dog refuse affection from a stranger. He's just shy, I lied, pulling Max closer to me. Of course, Colleen said, her smile never wavering. We'll be best friends soon enough. Over the following months, I watched my son fall deeper in love. Colleen was everywhere, always saying the right thing, always helpful, always perfect. She volunteered at the animal shelter on Saturdays and posted photos of herself cuddling rescue puppies with hashtags like #AdoptDon'tShop and #DogMom. She brought me flowers every week and insisted on helping with grocery shopping after Frank died. You shouldn't be alone so much, Margaret, she'd say, sitting at my kitchen table while I made tea. Let me be here for you. David proposed after 6 months. The wedding came quickly, a small ceremony in my backyard with white roses and champagne. I gave them my blessing because what else could I do? My son was happy, or at least he looked happy. And I was just a widow learning to live alone in a house that echoed with memories. They moved into David's apartment across town, but Colleen visited me almost daily. I want us to be close, she said. I never had a good relationship with my own mother. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why. But grief makes you soft, makes you grateful for any warmth, even if it comes from a flame that might burn you. Max was my anchor in those days. Frank had brought him home as a puppy, saying, "Every house needs something alive in it, something that depends on you." After Frank's heart attack, Max became more than a pet. He was my therapist, my companion, my reason to get out of bed. We walked 3 miles every morning. He slept at the foot of my bed every night. His tail wagged whenever I entered a room, and his brown eyes held more understanding than most people I knew. But 6 months after the wedding, Max started changing. It was subtle at first. He stopped eating with his usual enthusiasm. His ribs began showing through his golden coat. When I took him to Dr. Morrison, our veterinarian, she ran blood tests, checked for parasites, examined his teeth. "Everything looks normal, Margaret," she said, stroking Max's head. "Sometimes older dogs go through phases. Let's monitor it." Then came the limping. His left front leg would tremble when he walked, and he'd flinch when I touched his side. Another vet visit, more tests, x-rays this time. No breaks, no obvious injuries, Dr. Morrison said, her brow furrowed. Could be arthritis starting, though he's young for it. Or maybe anxiety. Anxiety? I repeated. Dogs can develop it from changes in routine, environment, stress. She paused. Has anything changed at home? Everything and nothing, I thought. But I said, not really. The worst part was how Max started acting around Colleen. My friendly, therapy-certified golden retriever who'd never met a stranger he didn't love began hiding when she arrived. He'd slink under the dining room table or retreat to my bedroom, tail low, eyes anxious. Poor baby, Colleen would coo, trying to coax him out. "What's wrong with you, Max? Don't you like me?" One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard Max yelp from the living room. The sound was sharp, filled with pain. I rushed in to find Colleen standing near him, her hand reaching back as if she'd just pulled away from something. "What happened?" I demanded. She turned, her face arranged in concern. "He bumped into the coffee table. I think he's more clumsy than we thought." But Max was pressed against the wall, trembling, and the coffee table was 3 feet away. When I knelt beside him and ran my hands along his body, I felt a tender spot on his ribcage that made him whimper. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with Max curled against my legs, and I stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing. Frank's voice echoed in my head, the last thing he'd said to me before the paramedics took him away: "Protect what matters, Maggie." The next morning, I called my neighbor Dorothy. She'd been my friend for 15 years, a widow herself who understood loss and loneliness and the suspicions that come when something feels wrong but you can't prove it. "I think Colleen is hurting Max," I told her over the fence while Max sniffed the roses. Dorothy looked at me with her sharp blue eyes that never missed anything. "What does David say?" "I haven't told him." I swallowed hard. "He wouldn't believe me. He thinks she walks on water." "Then you need proof," Dorothy said simply. "My son-in-law installs security systems." "Want me to call him?" 2 days later, Dorothy's son-in-law Tom came over with a small box. Inside was something he called a nanny cam, a device no bigger than a deck of cards that could be hidden in plain sight. "Put it on a bookshelf, aim it at the main area," Tom explained, showing me how to download the app on my phone. "It's motion activated. Everything records to the cloud. You can watch live or review footage anytime." My hands shook as I held the camera. "Is this wrong? Spying on my daughter-in-law?" Dorothy squeezed my shoulder. "It's protecting your dog. There's nothing wrong with that." That evening, after Colleen left from one of her daily visits, I placed the camera on the third shelf of my bookcase, nestled between a photo of Frank and a ceramic vase. It pointed directly at the living room where Max's bed lay in the corner, where his food and water bowls sat by the kitchen entrance. I felt sick doing it. I felt like I was betraying David, violating some unspoken family trust. But then Max limped over and rested his head on my knee, and I thought about that bruise on his ribs, about the fear in his eyes when Colleen walked through the door. Frank's voice whispered in my memory, "Protect what matters." I turned on the camera. For 3 days, nothing happened. I watched hours of footage showing Max sleeping, drinking water, staring out the window. Colleen came and went, bringing groceries, chatting with me about David's work trips and weekend plans. The camera captured normal life, and I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, if grief and loneliness had made me paranoid. Then came day 4. The notification came at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday. I was at the grocery store, reaching for a box of Earl Grey tea, when my phone buzzed in my purse. The screen showed a simple message, "Motion detected in living room." My heart skipped. I'd been at the store for 20 minutes, which meant Colleen had just arrived. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and opened the app. The feed loaded slowly, buffering circles spinning while my pulse hammered in my ears. Then the image cleared. Colleen was standing in my living room, arms full of shopping bags. Max approached her, tail wagging uncertainly, the way he always did when trying to make peace with someone he feared. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought maybe I'd been wrong about everything. Then Colleen looked around. Left, right, toward the windows, the hallway. Checking if anyone was watching. Her face changed. The warm smile melted away like wax under flame, replaced by something cold and hard and empty. She dropped the bags and turned to Max, who had paused mid-step, sensing the shift. "Get away from me, you pathetic mutt," she hissed. Her voice was nothing like the sweet tone she used around me or David. This was raw, venomous, stripped of all pretense. Max's ears flattened, and he backed toward his bed in the corner. Colleen walked to the kitchen area where his food bowl sat today. She picked it up and examined it with disgust. "Does she really need to feed you this much? You're getting fat and useless." Then she threw it. Not dropped. Threw. The metal bowl flew across the room and clattered against the wall, spilling kibble across my hardwood floor. Max yelped and scrambled backward, pressing himself against the bookshelf. "Shut up, you disgusting animal," Colleen snapped, advancing on him. "I'm sick of pretending I care about you." She kicked at the scattered food, sending pieces skittering under the couch. Max's whole body was shaking now, his tail tucked so tightly beneath him I could barely see it. And I was standing in aisle 7 of Miller's Market, watching this through a screen 3 inches wide, unable to breathe, unable to move. Colleen crouched down to Max's level, grabbed his collar, and yanked his face close to hers. "You're in my way, do you understand? That old woman and her precious dog. Both of you are obstacles." I dropped my phone. The clatter made other shoppers turn, but I barely noticed. I bent down, snatched the phone off the tile floor with shaking hands, and ran. The shopping cart stayed where it was, the tea forgotten. I sprinted through the automatic doors, across the parking lot, fumbling for my car keys while the footage continued playing on my screen. Colleen had released Max and was moving through my house with familiarity that made my skin crawl. She opened my refrigerator, poured herself a glass of orange juice from the container I'd bought 2 days ago, and drank it while scrolling through her phone. Then she left, locking the door behind her like nothing had happened. The 15-minute drive home felt like drowning in slow motion. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my breath coming in short gasps. I kept replaying what I'd seen, what I'd heard. "You're in my way. Obstacles." These weren't the words of someone having a bad day. These were the words of someone who'd been wearing a mask for 3 years. When I burst through my front door, the house was exactly as the camera had shown, empty, quiet, scattered dog food on the floor. Max was still under the bookshelf, pressed so far back I could only see his nose and frightened eyes. "Come here, baby," I whispered, kneeling on the floor. "It's okay. She's gone." It took 5 minutes of coaxing before he crawled out. When I finally got my hands on him, I felt it immediately, a new bruise on his left shoulder, tender and swollen. He whimpered when I touched it, and something inside me cracked open. I had proof now. Video proof of Colleen's cruelty. Part of me wanted to call David immediately, to send him the footage and demand he see what I'd seen. But I didn't. Because I knew my son. I knew how love could blind you, how betrayal from someone you trusted was easier to deny than accept. I needed more. Not just one incident, but a pattern. Something irrefutable. So I waited. And I watched. Over the next week, I reviewed footage obsessively. I'd wake at 3 a.m. and scroll through recordings on my phone, watching Colleen's visits frame by frame. Each day brought fresh horrors. Day 5, she withheld Max's water. I watched her pour his full bowl down the sink, then stand there filing her nails while he licked at the empty dish, desperate and confused. When he whined, she sprayed him with water from the sink and laughed. Not so thirsty now, are you? Day 6, she grabbed his ear and twisted it, hard enough that Max yelped and tried to pull away. Stop making that noise, she snarled. Do you want Margaret to hear you? Want to get me in trouble? She twisted harder. You can't tell her anything, can you? Because you're just a stupid dog. Day 7, she locked him in the bathroom for 4 hours. I watched the timestamp, watched Max paw at the door, circle anxiously, finally lie down in defeat. When she finally let him out, his water bowl in there was empty, and there was an accident on the tile that she made him step through before shoving him aside. Disgusting, she muttered, cleaning it with paper towels. This would be so much easier without you. Day 8, she threw a hardcover book at him. I'd left my copy of To Kill a Mockingbird on the coffee table, and when Max walked past, Colleen picked it up and hurled it at his back leg. The impact made him stumble and cry out. She stood over him while he limped away and said, "Oops. Accidents happen." I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating properly. Dorothy came over with casseroles I barely touched and held my hand while I showed her the footage, tears streaming down both our faces. Call the police, Dorothy urged. Call David. This is abuse, Margaret. Clear abuse. Not yet, I said, my voice hollow. She'll just say the camera angle is misleading, that I edited things, that I'm a grief-stricken widow seeing things that aren't there. I need to know why. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. The answer came on day 9. I was reviewing older footage, going back to the first week I'd installed the camera, when I noticed something I'd missed before. On day 3, Colleen had been on the phone. I'd been in the bathroom at the time, so I wasn't in the frame, but Colleen was standing in my kitchen, leaning against the counter, speaking in low tones while Max cowered in the corner. I turned up the volume on my laptop, straining to hear. The audio was faint, partially obscured by the sound of my refrigerator humming, but I caught fragments. Old woman and her stupid dog are in the way. My blood turned to ice. David's inheritance is all tied up with her. I called Dorothy's son-in-law Tom. Can you enhance audio from a recording? He came over that night with equipment I didn't understand. We isolated Colleen's voice, filtered out background noise, and replayed the conversation. This time, I heard everything. The house is worth at least $850, and she's got that life insurance policy too. $500,000. Colleen's voice was casual, discussing my death like she was talking about the weather. David gets everything when she dies, which means we get everything. There was a pause while whoever she was talking to responded. I know it's taking too long, Colleen continued, irritation creeping into her tone. But I can't just push her down the stairs. It has to look natural. That's where the dog comes in. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the laptop. Max sees everything. He's always around, always watching. If something happened to Margaret, if there was any investigation, that dog would be a witness. Animals can sense violence. They remember. I need him gone first. Once the dog is out of the picture, she's just a lonely old woman who might have an accident. Slip in the shower. Fall down the stairs. Mix up her medications. Tom had gone pale. Dorothy was gripping my shoulder so hard it hurt. Trust me, Colleen said, her voice dropping to something almost tender. This is what I do. I've done it before. Another few months, and we'll be set. David will never suspect a thing. He thinks I'm perfect. The call ended. On the video, Colleen looked directly at Max and smiled. Hear that, doggy? Your days are numbered. I ran to the bathroom and vomited. When I came back, shaking and pale, Dorothy was on her phone. We're calling the police right now. No. My voice came out stronger than I felt. Not yet. That audio might not be admissible. She could claim it's doctored, taken out of context. I need her caught in the act. I need something so clear, so undeniable, that there's no way out. Margaret, she's planning to kill you, Tom said, his face grey. You can't just wait for that. I'm not waiting. I'm preparing. I felt something cold and hard settling into my chest, something that felt like Frank's military training, his calm under pressure. I need to copy all this footage. Multiple copies. Cloud storage, USB drives, send it to people I trust. I need to document every injury on Max with the vet. Create a paper trail. Timeline everything. And then? Dorothy asked. Then I make sure I'm never alone with her. I change my locks. I install more cameras. And I watch. Because people like Colleen, people who've done this before, they get confident. They get sloppy. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. Strategic. Cold. Patient. Every time Colleen visited, I was pleasant and grateful, playing the role of the dependent elderly mother-in-law while cameras recorded her every move. I documented 12 more instances of abuse. I had Max examined by Dr. Morrison 3 times, each visit adding to the medical record of unexplained injuries. I kept Max with me constantly, even sneaking him into places dogs weren't technically allowed. I changed my locks and told Colleen I'd lost my spare key. Could she wait outside when she visited? I installed a second camera in my bedroom, a third in the kitchen. My house became a fortress of evidence. But Colleen was getting suspicious. I could see it in the way she watched me, the questions about my schedule, my routine. She started showing up at random times, testing if I was really where I said I'd be. On day 21, I had a dentist appointment I couldn't reschedule. Root canal, booked months ago, time sensitive. I'd rearranged my entire life to avoid leaving Max alone, but this was unavoidable. It's just 90 minutes, I told Dorothy, who'd offered to house sit. But she'll know someone's here. She always checks the driveway. Then don't tell her about the appointment, Dorothy said. Let her think you're home. It was risky. But I was exhausted from weeks of hypervigilance, from sleeping 4 hours a night, from the constant weight of fear and fury. I set up 3 cameras, living room, kitchen, bedroom. I made sure Max had fresh water and his favorite toy. I kissed his head and whispered, I'll be back soon. I promise. The dentist's office was 20 minutes away. I sat in the waiting room, my phone clutched in my hand, the camera app open. 4:45 minutes, nothing happened. Just Max sleeping in his bed, the house quiet and still. Then at 2:47 p.m., motion detected. I opened the app and felt my heart stop. Colleen was letting herself in. She had a key somehow, maybe a copy she'd made before I changed the locks, maybe she'd picked it. I didn't know and didn't care because she was in my house and Max was there and she was carrying a plastic shopping bag. I have to go, I told the receptionist, standing up so fast my chair fell backward. Mrs. Hartley, the dentist is ready for. But I was already running, phone in hand, watching the screen as Colleen walked through my living room with purpose. She went straight to the kitchen, reached into the shopping bag, and pulled out a green container. Antifreeze. My fingers found 911 as I ran to my car. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I was already pulling out of the parking lot, my voice shaking but clear. My daughter-in-law is poisoning my dog right now. I'm watching her on camera. Please, you have to send someone. I gave them my address, confirmed I was on my way, and kept the phone on speaker as I drove. On the screen, Colleen was unscrewing the cap. She was pouring the bright green liquid into Max's food bowl, mixing it with the kibble like she was seasoning a meal. Units are en route, the dispatcher said. Stay on the line with me, Mrs. Hartley. But all I could see was that bowl, the same bowl I'd filled with love every morning for 8 years, now filled with death. And Max, my faithful Max, was starting to wake from his nap, drawn by the sound of kibble shifting in his dish. I pressed the accelerator harder, running a red light, my whole body screaming with the desperate mathematics of distance and time. 20 minutes away. How long did it take a dog to die from antifreeze? How long before Colleen's mask slipped away forever and I lost the only living thing that still connected me to Frank? On the screen, Max stood up and stretched. He took one step toward his bowl, then another. And I was still 15 minutes away. The speedometer climbed past 70 on a road where the limit was 45. My knuckles were bone-white on the steering wheel, and the dispatcher's voice kept repeating in my ear, calm and professional, asking me questions I could barely process. "Mrs. Hartley, are you still watching the camera feed?" "Yes," I gasped, my eyes darting between the road and my phone mounted on the dashboard. "She's still there. Max is walking toward the bowl. Oh God, he's so hungry, he doesn't know. Officers are 3 minutes out. Can you see if the dog has eaten anything yet?" I watched Max's nose lower toward the poisoned food, watched him sniff the kibble the way he always did, cautious and deliberate. Then he paused. His head tilted. Something in the smell must have registered as wrong because he backed away, just one step, his tail lowering. "He hasn't eaten it yet," I told the dispatcher, my voice cracking with relief. "But he's right there. She's in the other room. I can see her through the doorway, she's looking at something on her phone." 2 cars honked as I swerved around them. I didn't care. Nothing mattered except getting home, getting to Max before his hunger overcame his instincts. Dogs trusted their humans. They trusted the food put in their bowls. And Colleen had spent 3 years teaching him that I was the only human worth trusting, which meant when he got hungry enough, he'd eat. I need you to drive safely. The officers will be there before you." But I couldn't slow down. The streets blurred past, familiar landmarks becoming abstract shapes. Mrs. Chen's yellow house. The oak tree where Max liked to stop and sniff. The corner store where I bought my newspaper. My whole life condensed into a 13-minute drive that felt like drowning in molasses. At minute 11, I saw the flash of red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. "There's a police car behind me," I said. "That's one of our units," the dispatcher confirmed. "He's going to follow you to the residence." The cruiser pulled alongside me at the red light, and Officer Rodriguez looked over. I held up my phone, showing him the camera feed. He nodded and gestured for me to continue. When the light changed, we both accelerated, his sirens splitting the air. We pulled onto my street at the same time. I barely put the car in park before I was out, running up the walkway, my hip screaming with arthritis I'd ignored for years. Officer Rodriguez was faster. He reached my door first, his hand raised to knock. "She's inside," I panted, fumbling with my keys. "My daughter-in-law. She doesn't know I'm coming." "Step back, Rodriguez positioned himself beside the door, one hand on his radio, the other near his belt. "Let me go in first." But I couldn't step back. This was my house, my dog, my nightmare made real. I unlocked the door and pushed it open, and the first thing I heard was Colleen's voice, syrupy and false. "Margaret, you're home early." I was just. She stood in my living room, her face arranged in perfect surprise, holding a dish towel like she'd been cleaning. The shopping bag was nowhere visible. The antifreeze container was gone. But Max was still in the corner, pressed against the wall, and his food bowl sat on the floor with that sickly green tint mixed into the brown kibble. "Where's Max?" I pushed past Rodriguez, past Colleen's reaching hands, dropping to my knees beside my dog. "Baby, it's okay. I'm here." Max's whole body was trembling. He pressed his face into my chest, and I felt his rapid heartbeat against my palm. I ran my hands over him, checking for foam around his mouth, signs he'd ingested anything. His muzzle was dry. His breathing was fast but steady. "Margaret, what's going on?" Colleen's voice had an edge now, the sweetness cracking. "Why are the police here?" Officer Rodriguez stepped fully inside, and I heard another car pulling up outside. I'm going to need you to stay where you are. Don't touch anything." "Touch anything?" Colleen laughed, but it sounded wrong, too high and brittle. "This is ridiculous. Margaret, Did you call the police on me? What did you tell them? I stood up slowly, keeping Max behind me, and pulled out my phone. My hands had stopped shaking. In fact, I felt calmer than I had in weeks, like I'd been holding my breath underwater and finally surfaced. I opened the camera app and turned the screen toward her. I didn't tell them anything, I said quietly. I showed them. Colleen's face went slack. On my phone screen, the recording played, her entering my house, reaching into the bag, pouring the antifreeze, mixing it carefully, glancing toward the camera without realizing what she was looking at. 20 seconds of video that destroyed 3 years of pretending. That's not, she stopped, her brain visibly working, trying to find an angle, an excuse. You can't just record people without their knowledge. That's illegal. In my own home, a second officer had arrived, a woman with grey hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by pretty faces. I don't think so. I'm Officer Chen with Animal Control. I need to examine that dog. There's nothing wrong with the dog, Colleen snapped, then caught herself, smoothed her voice back to reasonable. I mean, Max is fine. Margaret is confused. She's been having memory issues lately. I have the container she used. I pointed to the kitchen. She put it in the recycling bin under the sink. Green antifreeze bottle, probably still has her fingerprints on it. Officer Rodriguez moved toward the kitchen while Chen knelt beside Max, speaking in low, soothing tones. She examined his eyes, his gums, felt along his body with practiced hands. Max tolerated it, but his eyes stayed fixed on Colleen, watchful and afraid. Rodriguez called from the kitchen. I need you to come here. Colleen didn't move. Her face had gone pale, 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying anything without a lawyer. That's your right. Rodriguez emerged holding an evidence bag containing the antifreeze bottle. But I'm going to need you to come with me to the station. This is insane. Colleen's voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Margaret is setting me up. She never liked me. She's been trying to turn David against me for years. Is this your dog's food bowl? Chen interrupted, holding up the metal dish with gloved hands. I nodded. I filled it this morning at 6 a.m. Just kibble and a spoonful of wet food for his digestion. Chen produced a small testing kit from her bag, the kind that looked like a pregnancy test. She dipped the strip into the contaminated food and waited. 30 seconds later, the strip turned dark blue. Positive for ethylene glycol, she said flatly. That's antifreeze. This food would have killed him within hours. The room went very quiet. Outside, I could hear my neighbors gathering, murmuring to each other. Dorothy's voice rose above the rest, asking if I was okay. But inside my living room, there was only the sound of Colleen's breathing, rapid and shallow, and the jingle of Max's collar as he pressed closer to my legs. Rodriguez pulled out his handcuffs. I'm placing you under arrest for animal cruelty and attempted poisoning of an animal. You have the right to remain silent. No. Colleen backed away, her hands up. No, you can't do this. David, I need to call David. He'll explain. This is all a misunderstanding. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I love that dog. Her voice hit a pitch I'd never heard, desperate and raw. I would never hurt him. Margaret is lying. She's a bitter old woman who's jealous that I have her son. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Rodriguez took her arm. Colleen yanked away, and for just a second, her mask shattered completely. She turned to me, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure, so absolute, that I took a step back. You did this, she hissed. You ruined everything. I had it all planned perfectly, and you couldn't just die like you were supposed to. You and that stupid dog. That's enough. Rodriguez had her arm again, firmer this time. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you? Colleen didn't answer. She just stared at me while they led her toward the door, her pretty face twisted into something ugly and unrecognizable. At the threshold, she started screaming, calling me names I'd never heard directed at anyone, let alone from someone's mouth who'd called me Mom for 3 years. The door closed behind them, and the silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Mrs. Hartley? Chen touched my arm gently. Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? I realized I was crying. Not sobbing, just tears running down my face while I stood there holding Max's collar, my whole body numb. Dorothy burst through the front door and wrapped her arms around me, and that's when my legs finally gave out. They caught me before I hit the floor, Chen and Dorothy on either side, lowering me into Frank's old recliner. Someone brought me water. Someone else was talking about paramedics. But all I could see was Max, sitting at my feet, his head resting on my knee, those brown eyes looking up at me with complete trust. You're safe now, I whispered to him, stroking his ears. We're both safe. Officer Chen sealed the food bowl as evidence and collected the antifreeze bottle from Rodriguez. She took photos of Max, documented the slight limp in his walk, the way his ribs showed through his coat, the old bruises fading to yellow on his side. I have more, I told her, pulling up my phone with shaking hands. 3 weeks of video. 12 separate incidents of abuse. Audio of her planning to kill me. I documented everything. Chen's expression shifted from professional sympathy to something harder, sharper. Mrs. Hartley, I'm going to need you to send all of that to me. And I'm calling Detective Silver from Special Victims. This is bigger than animal cruelty. A third police car arrived. Then a fourth. My quiet street transformed into a crime scene, yellow tape and flashing lights and neighbors standing in clusters on their lawns. Someone must have called the local news because a van with a satellite dish pulled up just as the paramedics checked my blood pressure. 160/95, the younger paramedic said. You're in hypertensive crisis. We should take you to the hospital. I'm not leaving my dog. Then we'll take you both. The older paramedic, a woman with kind eyes, helped Max into the ambulance beside the gurney. Animal control is going to meet us at the vet clinic next to County General. They'll check him thoroughly while we check you. Dorothy climbed in with us, holding my hand while the doors closed and the ambulance pulled away from my house. Through the back window, I could see Colleen being loaded into a police car, her head down, her perfect hair falling forward to hide her face. At the hospital, they put me in a small room with beige walls and the smell of antiseptic. A doctor listened to my heart, took my blood pressure again, asked questions about stress and medications and whether I'd been eating properly. I answered mechanically, my mind replaying the moment Colleen's mask had finally shattered, the venom in her voice, the hatred in her eyes. Mrs. Hartley? A man in a grey suit stood in the doorway, his badge clipped to his belt. I'm Detective Silver. I'd like to ask you some questions. Detective Silver had the kind of face that had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. He pulled a chair beside my hospital bed and opened a small notebook, the old-fashioned kind with spiral binding and a worn leather cover. Officer Chen briefed me on what happened today, he said, his voice low and calm. But I want to hear it from you. Start from the beginning. So I told him everything. About Colleen's too-perfect arrival 3 years ago, about Max's gradual decline, about the nanny cam and the 3 weeks of footage. I told him about the phone conversation where she'd discussed my death like it was an item on a shopping list. Silver's pen moved steadily across the paper, and his expression never changed, but I saw his jaw tighten when I described her twisting Max's ear. I need you to send me every piece of footage you have, he said when I finished. Everything on the cloud, every USB copy, every file. Can you do that? Dorothy, still sitting beside my bed, pulled out her phone. I have copies too. Margaret sent them to me for safekeeping. Smart. Silver looked at me with something like respect. Most people in your situation would have confronted the abuser directly. You built a case instead. My late husband was in the military, I said quietly. He always told me, document everything, trust no one, and never let them see you coming. He taught you well. Silver stood, tucking his notebook into his jacket. I'm going to be honest with you, Mrs. Hartley. What I saw on that footage Chen showed me, what you've described, this isn't just about a dog. This is a pattern. And people who have patterns like this, they've usually done it before. Something cold slid down my spine. What do you mean? I mean I'm going to run your daughter-in-law's name through every database we have. Criminal records, civil suits, previous addresses. If she's done this before, I'll find it. He left, and I was alone with Dorothy and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Through the wall, I could hear other patients, other lives playing out in their own small rooms. My blood pressure had come down to 140/85, still high but no longer dangerous. They wanted to keep me overnight for observation. I need to see Max, I said. Dorothy squeezed my hand. The vet clinic is right next door. As soon as they discharge you, we'll go. But I couldn't wait. I pulled off the blood pressure cuff and the pulse oximeter, ignoring the machine's protest beeps, and stood up. My legs were steadier now, the adrenaline crash fading into something harder and more determined. Margaret, you can't just watch me. I walked out of that hospital room in my yoga pants and the t-shirt I'd worn to the dentist, Dorothy trailing behind me, through corridors that smelled of floor polish and fear. The vet clinic shared a parking lot with the hospital, and the receptionist looked up in surprise when I walked in. I'm here for Max Hartley, I said. Golden retriever, brought in by animal control. She checked her computer. He's still being examined. Dr. Morrison is with him now. Are you the owner? I'm his mother. Something in my voice must have convinced her because she nodded and picked up the phone. 3 minutes later, Dr. Morrison emerged from the back, her face grave. Margaret. She hugged me, something she'd never done in all our years of appointments. I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. All those unexplained injuries, the weight loss. You couldn't have known, I interrupted. She was careful. She made sure nothing was obvious enough to prove. Dr. Morrison led me to an examination room where Max lay on a padded table, and 4-line in his front leg. His tail thumped weakly when he saw me, and I pressed my face into his fur, breathing in his familiar smell of grass and sunshine and home. He's dehydrated and malnourished, Dr. Morrison said, pulling up x-rays on a light board. Look here. These are old fractures in 2 ribs, healed but visible. And here, his left front leg shows signs of repeated trauma. The joint is inflamed, consistent with being struck or twisted repeatedly. I stared at the images, at the evidence of suffering my dog had endured while I'd been too blind to see. Will he be okay? Physically, yes. With proper nutrition and care, he'll recover. But the psychological damage. She trailed off, watching Max flinch at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. That takes longer. He's going to be fearful for a while. Possibly aggressive toward women who resemble your daughter-in-law. Dogs remember trauma the way humans do. Can I take him home? I want to keep him overnight on fluids. But tomorrow, yes. He's lucky, Margaret. If he'd eaten that food. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I stayed with Max until visiting hours ended, stroking his head while he slept, whispering promises about walks in the park and steak for dinner and never, ever leaving him alone again. Dorothy drove me home through streets gone dark, past my house with its yellow police tape still fluttering in the evening breeze. You can't stay there tonight, Dorothy said firmly. Come to my place. But I needed to be in my house, needed to reclaim the space Colleen had poisoned with her presence. I thanked Dorothy, promised to call if I needed anything, and walked through my front door into the crime scene that used to be my home. The living room had been processed. Fingerprint dust covered my bookshelf, my coffee table, my doorknobs. Max's food bowl was gone, bagged as evidence. The recycling bin had been emptied, its contents seized. I stood in the center of it all and felt Frank's absence like a physical wound. He would have known what to do. He would have seen through Colleen's mask from day one. My phone rang at 10:47 p.m. David's name flashed on the screen. I answered on the 3rd ring. Hello, son. Mom. His voice was wrecked, barely recognizable. I just got off a plane. The police called me. They said Colleen was arrested. They said she tried to kill Maximum. Tell me it's not true. Please tell me there's been some mistake. There's no mistake. Silence. Then a sound that might have been a sob or might have been something breaking inside him. I'm coming over, he said. David, it's late. I'm already in my car. He arrived 20 minutes later, still in his business suit from the conference he'd been attending in Chicago. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were red-rimmed. He stood on my doorstep like a stranger asking for shelter, and I pulled him inside, my baby boy who wasn't a baby anymore, who'd brought a monster into our lives. "Show me," he said. "Whatever evidence you have, I need to see it." We sat on my couch, the one Frank had picked out 15 years ago, and I played the footage on my laptop. All of it. Every kick, every cruel word, every moment of torture she'd inflicted on Maximum. David watched in silence, his face going from denial to shock to horror to something that looked like death. When I played the audio of her phone conversation, the one where she discussed my inheritance and the plan to kill me, he made a sound like a wounded animal. "I brought her into your life," he whispered. "I married her. I brought a murderer into our family. You didn't know. I should have known." He stood abruptly, pacing my small living room like a caged thing. "The signs were there. You tried to tell me. That first dinner when Max wouldn't go near her. The way she always wanted to know about your finances. How she volunteered to handle your medications after Dad died. God, Mom, she was trying to kill you, and I was so blind. David. I made him look at me. This is not your fault. Colleen is a predator. She chose you because you're kind and trusting. She chose me because I'm old and alone. These are things we should be proud of, not ashamed of. The shame belongs to her." He collapsed beside me, and my 65-year-old son cried in my arms the way he'd done as a child. We stayed like that for a long time, while outside my window the neighborhood settled into sleep, unaware that in this small house, a family was fracturing and reforming all at once. At midnight, Detective Silver called. "Mrs. Hartley, are you sitting down?" "I am now. We ran your daughter-in-law through the system. Her real name is Patricia Brennan. She's wanted for questioning in connection with 4 suspicious deaths across 3 states." The room tilted. David grabbed my arm, steadying me. "What kind of deaths?" I asked. "Elderly individuals, all with assets, all with pets that died shortly before their owners did. The first case was in Florida, 2018. An 82-year-old man named Harold Chen. His dog was found dead from rat poison. 2 months later, Harold fell down his basement stairs and broke his neck. His caregiver, a young woman named Colleen Myers, inherited $50,000 he'd added her to his will. Oh my God. There's more. Georgia, 2019. A widow named Sandra Perkins, 74. Her cat was poisoned with antifreeze. 3 months later, Sandra disappeared. They found her car abandoned near a hiking trail. Colleen Myers, using a different last name, had been Sandra's companion and was the last person to see her alive. She'd been named in Sandra's will for $100,000 and the deed to her house. Silver continued with 2 more cases, each following the same pattern. Befriend a vulnerable person, eliminate their pet to remove emotional support and witnesses, then stage an accident or disappearance. Each time, Colleen had walked away with money, property, or insurance payouts. Each time, she'd changed her name slightly and moved to a new state. Her previous husband, Silver said, his voice grim, Matthew Brennan, died in a house fire in 2022. The fire started in the kitchen while he was sleeping. Investigation ruled it accidental, but there were inconsistencies. Colleen collected $300,000 in life insurance and disappeared. That's when she became Colleen Hartley and found your son. David had gone grey. He stood up and walked to the bathroom, and I heard him being sick. The FBI is taking over the case, Silver continued. They're treating this as a serial murder investigation. Your footage, your documentation, it's the first solid evidence anyone's gotten on her. You may have just solved 4 cold cases and saved your own life. After Silver hung up, I sat in the silence of my living room and tried to process what I'd learned. The woman who'd brought apple pie to Sunday dinner, who'd posted pictures of rescue puppies on social media, who'd called me mom with that perfect smile, was a serial killer. She'd murdered at least 4 people, possibly more. And I'd been next. David emerged from the bathroom, pale and shaking. Did I hear that right? 4 people. Maybe more. He sank to the floor, his back against the wall, and put his head in his hands. I loved her. I thought we were going to have children together. I thought we were going to grow old together. And the whole time, she was planning to kill my mother. She never loved you, David. She loved what you represented. Access to me, to the house, to the inheritance. How could I not see it? Because that's what predators do. They're experts at camouflage. We didn't sleep that night. We sat in my living room drinking coffee while the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Through the window, I saw my neighbors beginning their morning routines. Mr. Peterson getting his newspaper. Mrs. Chen walking her poodle. The world continuing as if nothing had changed, when everything had changed. At 8 a.m., Dorothy knocked on my door with a casserole and red eyes from crying. By 9 a.m., 3 news vans had parked on my street. By 10 a.m., Detective Silva returned with an FBI agent, a woman named Torres who had a folder thick with documents and a list of questions that took 2 hours to answer. They wanted to know everything: how Colleen had behaved, what she'd said, where she'd gone, who she'd talked to. They recorded David's statement about their relationship, their finances, Colleen's access to my house and medications. They confiscated my laptop, my phone, every USB drive with footage, promising to return them after copying the evidence. Mrs. Hartley, Agent Torres said as she was leaving, "You understand you'll need to testify when this goes to trial?" I understand. It won't be easy. Defense attorneys will try to discredit you, claim you're a bitter mother-in-law, suggest you edited the footage or manipulated your son. They'll attack your age, your memory, your motives. I thought of Frank, of his steady voice saying, "Never let them see you coming." I thought of Max, fighting for his life in a vet clinic because he'd loved me enough to trust the food I put in his bowl. I thought of Harold Chen, Sandra Perkins, Matthew Brennan, and all the others who died because someone thought they were easy prey. "Let them come," I said quietly. "I'm ready." Agent Torres smiled, and it was the smile of one warrior recognizing another. "I believe you are." After they left, I went to the vet clinic to bring Max home. He was waiting by the door of his kennel, his tail wagging slowly when he saw me. Dr. Morrison had bathed him, and his golden coat shone in the fluorescent lights. He walked with a slight limp, and he flinched when a female technician walked past, but when I knelt beside him and opened my arms, he came to me without hesitation. "Let's go home, baby," I whispered into his fur. And we did. Together. Survivors both. 6 months passed between Colleen's arrest and the day I walked into that courtroom. 6 months of depositions and interviews, of journalists camping on my lawn, of sleepless nights replaying every conversation I'd ever had with her, searching for clues I'd missed. 6 months of watching Max slowly remember how to trust again. The courthouse stood downtown, a grey stone building that looked like it had witnessed 1,000 tragedies and would witness 1,000 more. I arrived early on that October morning, Dorothy on one side and David on the other. Max walked between us, his therapy dog vest reinstated, his presence approved by Judge Patricia Hendricks as both emotional support and evidence. The gallery was packed. I recognized faces from my neighborhood, reporters I'd seen on television, and others I didn't know, people who'd followed the case online and wanted to see the woman called the Black Widow killer face justice. Colleen sat at the defense table in a grey suit, her hair pulled back severely, her face arranged in an expression of wounded innocence. She didn't look at me. Not once. Her attorney, Gregory Marsh, was a man in his 50s with silver hair and a reputation for defending the indefensible. He'd held a press conference the week before, claiming his client was the victim of a vendetta by an unstable elderly woman with dementia. The morning shows had debated it for days. Some believed him. Most didn't. But doubt was all he needed, just one juror willing to question my credibility. Judge Hendricks entered, and we all stood. She was a black woman in her 60s with grey threading through her natural hair and eyes that had presided over 3 decades of human cruelty. When she told us to be seated, her voice carried the weight of someone who would tolerate no nonsense in her courtroom. The People versus Patricia Brennan, also known as Colleen Hartley, the bailiff announced. Charges include attempted murder, animal cruelty in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and assault with a deadly weapon. Prosecutor Rebecca Chang stood to give her opening statement. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with black hair cut sharply at her shoulders and a voice that filled the courtroom without shouting. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this is a story of calculated evil hidden behind a smile. For 3 years, the defendant wore a mask. She pretended to be a loving wife, a devoted daughter-in-law, an animal lover who posted pictures of rescue puppies on social media. But masks slip. And when they do, they reveal the truth underneath. She outlined the case methodically. The pattern of abuse against Max, documented on video. The antifreeze in the food bowl. The phone conversation discussing my death like it was a business transaction. The 4 previous cases in other states, each following the same blueprint: befriend, eliminate the pet, kill the target, collect the money, move on. The defendant is a predator, Chang said, her voice steady and cold. She hunts the vulnerable and the trusting. She has left a trail of bodies across 3 states. And the only reason Margaret Hartley is alive to testify today is because she trusted her instincts and installed a camera. That camera captured the truth. And that truth is about to destroy the defendant's carefully constructed lies. When Chang sat down, the jury looked shaken. 2 of the women had tears in their eyes. The man in the front row who'd been taking notes had stopped writing and was staring at Colleen with unconcealed disgust. Gregory Marsh stood for his opening statement, and his approach was exactly what I'd expected. Attack the victim, create reasonable doubt, make them question what they thought they knew. "My client is not a predator," he said, his voice warm and reasonable. "She's a young woman who married for love and found herself targeted by a jealous mother-in-law who never accepted her. Margaret Hartley never liked Colleen from day one. She made that clear. And when an elderly woman with too much time on her hands and access to video editing software decides to create a narrative, we have to ask ourselves, what are we really seeing?" He suggested I'd manipulated the footage, that the camera angles were misleading, that what looked like abuse was actually Colleen disciplining a misbehaving dog. He claimed the antifreeze was a tragic misunderstanding, that Colleen had been cleaning my garage and accidentally contaminated the dog food. He painted me as a bitter, lonely widow desperate for attention and willing to destroy an innocent woman to get it. Some of the jurors were nodding. Not many, but enough to worry me. The first witness was Officer Rodriguez, who described the scene when he'd arrived at my house. His testimony was straightforward and professional. He'd found me in distress, the dog showing signs of abuse, the food bowl testing positive for ethylene glycol, and the defendant caught on camera pouring antifreeze into that bowl. "Was there any question in your mind about what you were seeing?" Chang asked. "None whatsoever," Rodriguez replied. The video evidence was clear and unambiguous. Marsh's cross-examination tried to poke holes in the timeline, suggesting Rodriguez had been influenced by my emotional state and rushed to judgment. But Rodriguez held firm. He'd been a cop for 18 years. He knew animal abuse when he saw it. Next came Dr. Morrison, my veterinarian. She brought x-rays, medical records dating back 6 months, documentation of every unexplained injury Max had suffered. The jury leaned forward to see the images on the projection screen: fractured ribs, inflamed joints, evidence of repeated trauma. "In your professional opinion," Chang asked, "were these injuries consistent with accidental causes?" "No." Dr. Morrison's voice was firm. "These were consistent with deliberate, repeated abuse. The pattern of injuries, their locations, the timing, all suggested systematic cruelty over an extended period." When Chang showed the compilation of video footage, the courtroom went silent. 45 minutes of evidence, edited chronologically, showing Colleen's transformation from smiling daughter-in-law to sadistic abuser. The jury watched her kick Max's food bowl, twist his ear, lock him in the bathroom, throw books at him, call him disgusting, worthless, an obstacle that needed to be removed. I watched their faces. The woman in the back row with the cat pin on her lapel was crying openly. The man next to her had his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Even the juror who'd been nodding during Marsh's opening statement looked ill. Then came the poisoning attempt. Crystal clear footage of Colleen pouring antifreeze into Max's food bowl, mixing it with her finger, glancing around to make sure she was alone. When she smiled at the camera, not knowing what it was, several jurors gasped. The defense will claim this footage was edited, Chang said after the video ended. So we brought in Dr. Alan Wright, a forensic video analyst, to examine every frame. Dr. Wright testified for 90 minutes about metadata, timestamps, digital signatures, and the impossibility of editing footage without leaving traces. He'd examined my videos at the FBI's request and found them completely authentic, unaltered from the moment they were recorded to the moment they were submitted as evidence. Is there any possibility, Chang asked, that Mrs. Hartley manipulated these videos in any way? None, Dr. Wright said flatly. The files are forensically sound. What you see is exactly what the camera recorded. No edits, no manipulation, no digital alteration of any kind. Marsh tried to discredit him, suggesting he was biased because the FBI paid him. But Dr. Wright had testified in over 200 trials, for both prosecution and defense, and his credentials were unimpeachable. Dorothy took the stand next, describing the day she'd helped me install the camera, confirming I barely knew how to use the app on my phone, let alone edit video. She testified about finding Max with bruises, about my growing suspicion, about the copies of footage I'd sent her for safekeeping. Did Margaret ever express hatred toward Colleen? Marsh asked during cross-examination. Not hatred, Dorothy said carefully. Concern. Suspicion. Fear. But not hatred. Margaret wanted to be wrong. She hoped every day that she was wrong. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand with Max beside me, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Chang guided me through the timeline gently, letting me tell the story in my own words. I described the first dinner, Max's reaction, the gradual changes I'd noticed. I explained why I'd installed the camera, what I'd discovered, the horror of watching the poisoning attempt live while racing home. Why didn't you confront Colleen directly? Chang asked. Because I knew no one would believe me without proof, I said. My son was in love with her. Everyone thought she was perfect. If I'd accused her without evidence, I would have looked like exactly what Mr. Marsh claims I am, a jealous, bitter old woman. So I documented everything. I built a case. Because I knew that when the truth came out, it had to be undeniable. Chang played the audio of Colleen's phone conversation, the one discussing my inheritance and the plan to eliminate Max first, then me. My voice was steady as I explained what I'd felt hearing my own death discussed so casually. Were you afraid? Chang asked. Terrified, I admitted. But more than that, I was angry. She'd looked me in the eye for 3 years and lied. She'd tortured my dog, the last living connection I had to my husband. She'd manipulated my son. And she'd planned to kill me and make it look like an accident so she could steal everything my husband and I had worked our whole lives to build. Yes, I was afraid. But I was also determined that she wouldn't win. Marsh's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to catch me in contradictions, suggested I'd embellished details, questioned whether I was really afraid or just vindictive. But I'd spent 6 months preparing for this moment, and I didn't waver. Isn't it true, Mrs. Hartley, that you never liked my client? I wanted to like her, I replied. I tried to like her. But a mother knows when something is wrong with the people around her child. And I was right. Or you convinced yourself you were right and manufactured evidence to support your delusion. The camera doesn't lie, Mr. Marsh. Your client does. The judge sustained an objection, but the jury had heard it. And when Marsh finally dismissed me, I walked back to my seat knowing I'd held my ground. FBI agent Torres testified about the pattern of deaths across multiple states, connecting each case to Colleen through names, locations, and methods. She presented evidence of the previous victims, Harold Chen, whose dog died of rat poison before he fell down the stairs. Sandra Perkins, whose cat was poisoned before she disappeared. Matthew Brennan, Colleen's previous husband, who died in a fire after she'd taken out a life insurance policy on him 3 months earlier. In your assessment, Chang asked, was there a pattern? Absolutely, Torres replied. The defendant targets vulnerable individuals with assets. She gains their trust, becomes indispensable to them. Then she eliminates their pets, which serves 2 purposes. It removes emotional support, making the victim more dependent and easier to manipulate, and it eliminates a potential witness. Dogs, in particular, remember violence. They react to their abusers. Without the pet, there's no one to warn others that something is wrong. The testimony lasted 3 days. Expert after expert, witness after witness, building a wall of evidence so solid that even Marsh's skillful objections couldn't knock it down. Then Colleen made a mistake. Against her attorney's advice, she insisted on testifying. She took the stand wearing a pale blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, trying to look young and innocent and wronged. Her voice was soft, trembling strategically as she denied everything. The videos were taken out of context. The antifreeze was an accident. She loved Max like her own pet. Margaret had always been cold to her, and she'd tried so hard to win her approval. Chang's cross-examination was surgical. Ms. Brennan, when did you change your name from Patricia to Colleen? After my divorce. I wanted a fresh start. And how many fresh starts have you had? How many names? How many states? Colleen's composure cracked slightly. I don't know what you mean. Let me help you remember. Patricia Brennan in North Carolina. Colleen Myers in Florida. Colleen Sanders in Georgia. Colleen Phillips in South Carolina. And finally, Colleen Hartley here. That's 5 names in 7 years. Why so many fresh starts? I was trying to escape an abusive past. Or escape investigations into the deaths of people you befriended. Marsh objected. The judge sustained it. But the jury had heard the question, and Colleen's face had gone pale. Chang continued relentlessly, confronting her with her own words from the recorded phone call, with financial records showing her access to my accounts, with testimony from previous victims' families who'd never quite believed the official explanations for their loved ones' deaths. By the time Colleen left the stand, her mask had shattered. She was defensive, arrogant, contemptuous. She referred to me as that paranoid old woman and called Max just a dog. The jury recoiled visibly, several crossing their arms, one woman shaking her head in disgust. The closing arguments were brief. Chang reminded the jury of the evidence, the pattern, the undeniable truth captured on video. Marsh made one last attempt to create doubt, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. Even he knew his client had destroyed her own defense. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, I was holding Max's collar with one hand and David's hand with the other. The forewoman stood, a middle-aged black woman with grey in her hair and steel in her spine. On the count of attempted murder, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of animal cruelty in the 1st degree? Guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder? Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Colleen screamed, lunging halfway out of her chair before bailiffs restrained her. You're all fools. That dog should have died. She should have died. I had it all planned perfectly, and you're too stupid to see. The bailiffs pulled her down, and Judge Hendricks slammed her gavel. Order. Order in this court. But Colleen kept screaming, her voice shrill and unhinged, confirming everything the jury had just decided. Security dragged her toward a door, and as she passed my row, she spat in my direction. The spittle landed on the floor 3 feet away, but the venom in her eyes was pure poison. David was crying. Dorothy was hugging me. Max was pressed against my legs, trembling from the noise but safe, finally safe. 2 weeks later, we returned for sentencing. Judge Hendricks looked down at Colleen with an expression of cold contempt. Your actions reveal a depravity that chills the soul, she said. You targeted the vulnerable and the innocent. You tortured an animal for your own gratification. You planned the murder of an elderly woman for financial gain. You have shown no remorse, no humanity, no recognition of the suffering you've caused. She sentenced Colleen to 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, 5 years for animal cruelty, and additional time for fraud and assault, all to be served consecutively. 30 years in state prison, Judge Hendricks declared. And I hope you serve every single day. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and microphones thrust toward my face. Dorothy held one arm, David the other, and Max walked between us, his therapy vest bright against his golden coat. Prosecutor Chang had prepared a statement for me, suggested I keep it brief and professional. But when I reached the microphone, Frank's voice whispered in my memory, "Truth needs no rehearsal." "My name is Margaret Hartley," I said, my voice steady. 6 months ago, I installed a camera in my living room because I suspected my daughter-in-law was hurting my dog. What I discovered was so much worse than I imagined. Colleen, whose real name is Patricia Brennan, is a serial predator who has left a trail of bodies across 3 states. She planned to kill me and make it look like an accident. She would have succeeded if I hadn't trusted my instincts. The cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. I continued. "I'm standing here today to tell you 3 things. First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't let people convince you that you're paranoid or bitter or imagining things. Second, document everything. In this age of technology, we have tools our parents never had. Use them. A $20 camera saved my life and brought justice for at least 4 other victims. And third, speak up for those who can't speak for themselves." Max couldn't tell me what was happening to him. But his fear, his injuries, his behavior, those were his voice. I just had to listen. A reporter shouted a question about whether I'd known Colleen was a killer from the beginning. I shook my head. I knew something was wrong. I knew she wasn't who she pretended to be. But serial killer? No. I thought she was just cruel. I thought she just didn't like dogs. It wasn't until Detective Silver discovered her history that I understood what I'd really been dealing with. Another question, about how David was coping. "My son is heartbroken," I said honestly. "He loved someone who never existed. The woman he married was a character Colleen created, a mask she wore to gain access to our family. That kind of betrayal doesn't heal quickly, but he'll heal. We both will. Because we survived, and survival is its own kind of justice." The media attention was overwhelming. For weeks, I couldn't go to the grocery store without being recognized. Morning shows wanted interviews. Podcasts requested my story. A producer from Los Angeles called about a movie. I declined most of it, accepting only a few interviews with victims' rights organizations and animal welfare groups. Max's law was introduced in the state legislature 2 months after the trial, a bill requiring mandatory reporting of suspected animal abuse and creating a database to track abusers across jurisdictions. I testified before the committee, Max beside me, and watched politicians from both parties vote unanimously to pass it. This law could have saved lives, I told them. If Colleen's abuse of animals in Florida had been properly reported and tracked, authorities in Georgia might have been alerted. Sandra Perkins might still be alive. Harold Chen might have celebrated his 85th birthday. My dog might never have suffered. We can't change the past, but we can protect the future. The law passed. News outlets called it a landmark victory. But for me, it was simpler than that. It meant other Maxes might be saved. Other Margarets might be warned before it was too late. At home, life slowly returned to a new version of normal. Max gained back the weight he'd lost, his ribs disappearing beneath healthy muscle. His limp faded. The fear in his eyes when women approached gradually lessened, though he never fully lost his wariness around strangers. Dr. Morrison said that was okay, that caution wasn't the same as trauma. He's allowed to remember, she told me during a checkup. Memory protects us from making the same mistakes twice. David visited 3 times a week, sometimes more. He'd filed for divorce the day after Colleen's arrest, and the proceedings were swift once her criminal conviction came through. He started therapy, working through the betrayal and the guilt, learning to trust his own judgment again. "I keep replaying every conversation," he told me one evening, sitting on my porch while Max dozed between us. "Looking for clues I missed." She talked about having kids, about growing old together. Was any of it real? Did she feel anything? "I don't think people like Colleen feel the way we do," I said gently. The FBI psychologist called it antisocial personality disorder. She mimics emotions, but she doesn't experience them. Everything is transactional. You were a means to an end. And the end was you. His voice broke. My wife was going to kill my mother. But she didn't. Because you raised me to be strong, and Frank taught me to trust my gut, and together we stopped her. That's what matters, David. We won. He started dating again after 6 months, a teacher named Rebecca who worked at the elementary school and had a rescue cat named Buttons. He brought her to Sunday dinner, nervous and hopeful, and I watched the way Max approached her without fear, the way she spoke to him gently, asking permission before petting him. Later, David pulled me aside. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think she's lovely. I think she's real. I think she looked at you, not your wallet or your house or your connections. She looked at you." "How can you tell?" "Because I'm your mother, and I'm paying attention this time." Rebecca became a regular presence, helping with dishes, playing fetch with Max in the backyard, listening to David's stories about his father with genuine interest. They took things slowly, both scarred by previous relationships, both learning to trust again. A year later, David asked my blessing to propose. "You have it," I said, hugging him. "But David, promise me something. Anything. Promise you'll never ignore red flags again. Not for love, not for loneliness, not for hope. If something feels wrong, investigate. Always investigate." "I promise, Mom. I promise." Colleen's appeals were denied repeatedly. The evidence was too strong, her courtroom outburst too damaging, her pattern of behavior too clear. She wrote me letters from prison, dozens of them, filled with threats and blame and twisted justifications. I never read them. Prosecutor Chang handled them, documenting each one as additional evidence of her mental state. "She still doesn't understand what she did wrong," Chang told me during one of our occasional coffee meetings. "She thinks she's the victim here. That's the scariest part. She genuinely believes she deserves sympathy. Will she ever get out? Not in our lifetime. And probably not in hers. 30 years, with her history. The parole board won't touch her. She'll die in prison, Margaret. You made sure of that." I didn't feel triumphant hearing it. Just tired. Justice was necessary, but it wasn't satisfying the way I'd imagined it would be. Colleen was locked away, but Harold Chen was still dead. Sandra Perkins was still missing. Matthew Brennan's family still grieved. And I still woke some nights from dreams where I hadn't installed the camera, where I'd been too late, where Max had eaten the poisoned food and I'd watched him die. On those nights, I'd go to Max's bed in my room and place my hand on his side, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. He'd open one eye, thump his tail once, and go back to sleep. Alive. Safe. Home. 1 year after the trial, I visited Frank's grave with fresh flowers. Max came with me, lying on the grass while I talked to the headstone like Frank could hear me. "I did it, love," I said. "I protected what you asked me to protect. Our family. Our dog. Our home." I stopped her. The wind blew warm, carrying the smell of cut grass and jasmine. Max's ears perked up, and he looked toward the horizon where clouds were building, white and towering and full of light. "I miss you," I continued. "Every day, I miss you. But I understand now what you meant when you said I was stronger than I knew. You were preparing me, weren't you? For a day when you wouldn't be here to protect me, and I'd have to protect myself." A cardinal landed on Frank's headstone, bright red against the grey granite. It sang 3 notes, clear and sharp, then flew away. Max watched it go, his tail wagging slowly. "I'm okay now," I said. "We're both okay. And I promise you, Frank, I'll never let anyone hurt us again. I'll stay vigilant. I'll stay strong. I'll protect what matters." I stood, brushed grass from my knees, and walked back to the car with Max beside me. Life was waiting. Sunday dinners with David and Rebecca. Book club with Dorothy. Volunteering at the animal shelter where I taught classes on recognizing signs of abuse. Speaking engagements for victims' rights groups. A full, purposeful life built on the ashes of what Colleen had tried to destroy. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Max lay at my feet, his head resting on my shoe, completely relaxed. The neighborhood was quiet. Peaceful. Safe. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner tomorrow? Rebecca wants to show you her ring design ideas." I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. Come early. I'll make pot roast." Inside the house, the nanny cam still sat on the bookshelf, its small light blinking green. I'd never taken it down. It was a reminder, a guardian, a witness to the truth that had saved our lives. I looked at Max, at his graying muzzle and wise eyes, at the dog who'd survived because I'd listened to what his fear was telling me. "We made it, old friend," I whispered. "Against a monster wearing a smile, against odds that should have killed us both, we made it." His tail thumped against the porch wood. Once. Twice. 3 times. And in that rhythm, I heard everything that mattered: survival, justice, love, and the promise that no one would ever hurt us again. The wind carried the smell of dinner cooking somewhere down the street, the sound of children laughing, the ordinary music of life continuing. I closed my eyes and breathed it in, grateful for every moment, every breath, every second chance I'd been given. Sometimes evil enters our lives disguised as love. But if we're brave enough to see the truth and strong enough to act, we can stop it. Max taught me that loyalty is worth fighting for. Frank taught me that strength comes from protecting what matters. And Colleen, without meaning to, taught me that I was never as helpless as I looked. I opened my eyes and looked at the sunset, at the world painted in fire and gold, and I knew that whatever came next, I was ready. Because I'd walked through the flames and emerged whole. And nothing could burn me again. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me share more stories of survival, justice, and strength. Comment below what city you're watching from, and tell me if you've ever had to trust your instincts against everyone's advice. Your support means these stories reach people who need them. Remember, abuse thrives in silence. Speak up. Document. Act. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. For Max, for all the voiceless victims, for justice. This is Margaret, and this is our story.